Similkameen-Nicola.
That's very kind, Madam Speaker. And it is indeed a pleasure to rise today. And first of all, as this is the first opportunity, Madam Speaker, I've had to thank the good people of Central Okanagan, Similkameen-Nicola for their continued support. I would just say to them all, thank you. It is a big honor. And Madam Speaker, let me begin also by congratulating all members on their election to this new Parliament. While there will undeniably be things we disagree upon, let us be mindful that Canadians sent us here to Parliament to find agreement and consensus. I am deeply saddened that my first words in this new Parliament are in this debate, while many of my constituents in communities such as Merritt and Princeton are facing unique and serious hardship as a result of flooding and the serious repercussions in the aftermath of that flooding. Indeed, as you shall hear also from my colleagues, this devastating situation has and is impacting other regions of British Columbia. Now, first, let me begin by stating an old but important fact. Excrement runs downhill. Now, I mention this because in many small rural communities, the most critical and important infrastructure works as follows. The community drinking water, be it sourced from well or dammed lakes or rivers, is treated in whatever manner the community can afford and pumped to a community reservoir. From there, it typically feeds via gravity system down through the community to the wastewater treatment facility. Now, the wastewater treatment facility is often located near a lake or river where treated effluent can be discharged safely. The challenge of this basic design is whenever there is flooding, it immediately runs downhill and overwhelms the river or lake. Yes, there is also some type of flood control and typically some infrastructure, be it dams, dikes, or whatever. And once that infrastructure is compromised, there's rarely any secondary line of defense. As the water levels rise with the flooding, this creates a situation where one of the very first pieces of community infrastructure that is compromised is the wastewater treatment plant. This is exactly what occurred in Merritt. Once the wastewater treatment plant is compromised, the ability of a community to function is compromised. And it does not end there, because once floodwaters have breached a wastewater treatment plant, those waters are now contaminated and considered toxic, and by extension unsafe, creating essentially a toxic cesspool. The higher the waters rise, the more the contamination is spread. Now, once residents have been submersed and compromised, the community's water system is now also compromised and unsafe. This, of course, means the community they live in is essentially unlivable and unsafe. The reality is next to nothing in your home or in our civic infrastructure is designed to be submerged in toxic, contaminated, unsafe floodwaters. Ultimately, Madam Speaker, this leads to evacuation orders. Now, in British Columbia, our emergency notification system is not as capable and as ready as it could be. Evacuating thousands of citizens in very short notice is a serious logistical challenge. Where do they go? How do they get there? Seniors in care homes need to be evacuated, transported, and a new care home found. Others with mobility issues and those who lack their own transport are in serious trouble. Worse, when you have serious flooding that brings mud and other debris, suddenly once navigable streets become unnavigable to emergency vehicle and first responders. And if the storm has also taken out some power lines or some transmission lines and other communications infrastructure, such as what has occurred in British Columbia recently, suddenly your wireless communications are compromised. How do you get help? How do those emergency responders get notification about those who need help? These are all situations that people in Merritt, Princeton, and elsewhere have faced. In one local Indigenous community, the bridge was washed out. It was the only way in or out of that community. No bridge, no power, no ability to evacuate, and a compromised ability to communicate. Frankly, we are all extremely fortunate that there were not more deaths as a result of this disaster. Because in this case, there was only one variable that with all of these serious challenges made the critical difference. And that variable is the people. The people who live in Princeton and Merritt. They were the difference. They saved their neighbors, the vulnerable, their own family, their friends, their pets. These are the people who are the unsung heroes. And now they need our help. Many went to communities such as Kelowna or Kamloops, where in many cases they found evacuation centers that were overwhelmed. They found that there was no place to go, no immediate assistance available. In reality, the evacuation centers and the provincial response could not keep up with this sudden, intense demand. This left many people on their own, many living in their vehicles. Some did find a motel, but they didn't have the funds to pay for it. And as others have shared, their line of credit on their credit card is now full, and they have no idea how they will pay that bill at the end of the month. Some, we shall not forget, got trapped because the roads became unpassable for them. Indeed, the challenges from our compromised transportation infrastructure was immediately felt. Within 48 hours, many grocery stores were largely empty. Now imagine, you've left your hometown of Merritt, literally nothing except the clothes on your back, and when you arrive in Kamloops or Kelowna, the grocery stores are empty. Now, that was the reality for many, and it is still a reality for some. Now, in the past days, you may have heard of residents are now allowed to come home. Now, on the surface, that sounds like a positive bit of progress, and for some, it certainly is. Now, let me explain what coming home really means. We all know in many cases there will be a serious mess. Anything immersed in water must be removed and destroyed. Now, that is a huge job in itself. And all of that contaminated material ends up on the street where it must be moved and properly disposed of. Now, this also creates serious challenges. That's where Princeton is right now. The mayor begged for Canadian Armed Forces personnel to help. Now, we know that there are boots in the ground now for Canadian Armed Forces in BC to help. And fortunately, earlier today, those personnel arrived in Princeton to provide this much-needed assistance. And I'm thankful for their service. I'm thankful that they are here, or there. Now, these are just some of the challenges facing these citizens as they return home. Well, let me explain another. Aside from removing your belongings and the serious mess left behind your home, when you arrive, you are likely to find either a red tag or a pink tag attached to your home. What's that mean? Well, if you have a pink tag means there's a possibility that your gas meter was submerged in floodwater or that your gas appliances may have been impacted by water. Now, if this is the case, your gas is now shut off, and you need to contract a licensed natural gas contractor to assess your natural gas system and then relight the appliances. Now, if you have a red tag, it means your gas meter was submerged in floodwater and your gas meter is now shut off and locked. This requires a licensed gas contractor and serious work to rectify. Now, as I'm sure all members can appreciate, even in a large city, it can be a serious challenge to obtain the services of a gas contractor. Now, just imagine the challenges in a small community where the demand is huge given these situations. And who pays for these gas contractors and the expensive work that's required? What if your last dollar or line of credit was used up staying at a hotel? What do you do? Now, these are very real questions that people in Merritt and Princeton are asking themselves right now. While local residents are facing these challenges, let us not also forget that many who call these communities home are facing these challenges are also community leaders, those who work in the civic yards. Right? For example, the mayor and council, civic staff, first responders, highway maintenance, police, paramedics, etc. All of these people are under tremendous pressure right now. They not only have their own problems to deal with at home, they must get their own community up and running. Now, I mentioned earlier the need to get sewer wastewater plants up and running, to flush out city lines, in many cases repair those lines because they are broken. Princeton has already had to authorize drilling another well. This could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars not afforded for in the city budget. And here's one of the biggest problems. Currently, the Disaster Financial Assistance Arrangements Program only covers 80% of the cost. Now, at a time when a local government is facing a disaster and virtually all civic infrastructure is compromised, an 80% contribution from senior levels of government is not enough. Now, normal times, 80% seems great. But I spoke to Mayor Spencer Coyne today, and he says it's way above their ability to pay. Tens of millions of dollars, just that 20%. So this creates enormous stress on civic leaders who are these decision makers. But what choice? What choice do they have? If you cannot fully pressurize a water reservoir, you don't have fire protection at a time where you're most likely to have gas leaks in your community. While local government staff tries to restart all of these basic infrastructure, things that we all take for granted, let's keep in mind that in many of these communities, the rental stocks were already very low. In places like Merritt and Princeton, they were near zero before this occurred. For example, in Collettville, a section of Merritt, it was hit the hardest by the flooding, and it will be the last part to be able for citizens to return. Now, can you imagine seeing what looks like your modular home as a senior floating away on the television, floating away with all you had in it? How can you find shelter in a community you've called home for decades if there is no alternatives? Now, I've been told by Mayor Linda Brown that without some form of rapid housing from seniors levels of government, some people will never return to Merritt because there's nothing for them to return to. She's expressed willingness to discuss potential municipal sites for some rapid housing, and I hope, Madam Speaker, tonight's discussion will result in something concrete for these residents. Mayor Coyne in Princeton has voiced similar willingness to connect. Now, I would like at this point to take a moment and sincerely thank all of those locally elected officials, the support staff they have, municipal staff, and most especially our first responders. Now, they are doing tremendously remarkable and amazing work in the most challenging and demanding of circumstances. And keep in mind, while all of this is going on, they're in a race against time, because every night the temperature gauge drops further below zero, and each day less and less back above zero. Now, the heavy winter freeze is setting in, and there is likely a 2 to 3 week window of opportunity before some of the activities will need to be put off until the spring. And let us be mindful, the forecast is suggesting that tomorrow there could be, in some parts of British Columbia, another 80 millimeters of rainfall and storm-like conditions. Now, I could spend, Madam Speaker, the rest of my allotted time talking tonight about the serious challenge that people in my riding, the good people of Merritt, Princeton, are facing, and the Indigenous communities that are in both the Similkameen and the Nicola Valley. However, I'm going to stop. I have shared some of these challenges with you because I believe it's critically important that we as democratically elected members of this place have an understanding of what these communities are going through. Because in this place, we can, and I submit, need to be part of the solution. Communities such as Merritt and Princeton are just two examples. We know in the Fraser Valley there's another situation, in Hope, Spencer's Bridge, and elsewhere. All of these communities need to do more than just rebuild. They need to rebuild and reinforce. Now, let there be no doubt our climate is changing. In my riding since 2017, we've witnessed the once in 200-year flood of Okanagan Lake, not just once, but twice. We have had the worst wildfire activity and smoke that has compromised air quality to levels never previously experienced. Now, this past summer, we also, as has been said by other members, had the heat dome, record heat levels that resulted in people dying. Now, this flooding with more severe weather in the forecast. So, what can we do? What can we do? I don't profess to have all the answers, and the need to consult in partnership with local and provincial, as well as First Nation communities, to consult with all of them is paramount. Now, I can pass just a few observations. In 2016, a rock slide damaged the Oliver Irrigation Canal. Now, this is a critical piece of infrastructure that serves the entire South Okanagan farming community. Now, I should say, this is not in my writing, but Madam Speaker, that doesn't change the importance of the example, especially considering this infrastructure. The community was prepared to invest their fair share for the repairs. The province stepped up to cover their share, but when it came to Ottawa to pay their share, the answer was no. Now, the reason? The bureaucrats said that the project did not fit into any established grant programs. That was the end of it. This is a serious problem. When critical agricultural infrastructure does not fit the criteria of Ottawa, it's not the fault of the residents of the South Okanagan. That is the fault of the bureaucracy and the thinking here in Ottawa. Now, going forward, we need grant funding programs that meet the needs of small communities as opposed to the political needs of a government in Ottawa. Now, another observation, in many small rural BC communities, the water services are provided by irrigation districts. Now, currently, these irrigation districts are not eligible for any senior government grant funding. Now, just think about that. This is a serious problem. These small communities need funds to protect their water system from the threats of our changing climate, yet by design, they're excluded from senior government grant funds, despite the fact that the users of these systems all pay taxes to provincial and federal government. Now, this situation has gone on for years, but I submit we can no longer continue to ignore it. I spoke with a regional director. Speaking of things we have to contend with, I spoke with a regional director from the areas around the village of Karamias who sent pictures of the dikes that are failing in his area, water that is leaking and flooding into largely older modular homes, largely seniors, and tells me if they fail, the RCMP, the ambulance, and fire station within the village of Karamias would be at risk, complicating an already difficult situation. So while we are here contending with the challenges of flooded communities today, we need to acknowledge that there are other small communities that teeter without sustainable arrangements for the fixing and maintenance of the water infrastructures. Now, I'm winding down, Madam Speaker, but just a few more observations. Many rural and Indigenous communities still don't have high-speed broadband or wireless service. The Infrastructure Bank, despite the fact that Canadians living in rural communities pay their taxes to fund infrastructure, an infrastructure bank that has been structured by this government in such a way that it won't be able to provide any benefit for any small community in Canada. Now, no matter how we try to cut all of these observations I've shared, Ottawa is part of the problem and not the solution. That needs to change. I don't really want to point fingers of blame. If anything, that is part of the problem itself. We continuously debate what is ultimately an Ottawa knows best policy that continues to adversely impact small rural communities. As our climate changes, we must ensure that Ottawa provides the resources that meets the demand of these small rural communities just as much as it does for our bigger centers. And I am hopeful, Madam Speaker, in the days, weeks, months going forward, that as communities like Princeton, like Merritt, as they try to rebuild, that we will have a federal government in Ottawa who will find ways to be there and support these communities and not tell them that they don't fit the criteria. Now, that's a challenge, Madam Speaker, we need to be up for. Failure is not an option for every citizen facing a loss in tough times in British Columbia. Right now, let's be our moment to stand with them and be there to support them. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for hearing my comments.